Hey there, welcome to this little Instagram live if you're here with me live, or if you are listening to this on the podcast, which I'll drop in the near future. I want to welcome you. So I'm grateful that you're all here today. The reason why I come on here live sometimes on this, on social media is because every once in a while there will be, I'll get the same question that'll come to me over and over again. And also sometimes I just like to check in, and do something kind of in the moment and just be present with you all. As I'm seeing some people jumping on. Hello to those of you who are coming on here live. That's always so fun. I just love the idea of not talking to myself in a room by myself is such a, it's a nice diversion for a podcaster to be in the presence, or at least have an awareness that you are here with me. So I am going to just roll through some questions that have been coming in somewhat consistently. And then some of you actually just recently sent some questions in on the question box that I left a couple of, I guess, yesterday. And this is just sort of an update on what we're doing over here, what's going on. Some of the things that I think some of the reasons why there are some questions is because there are some things going on here that are, new and improved, I think, as a platform. On the one hand, it's always fun and exciting to be, changing and updating and responding to the needs of you, my listeners and my audience and the people that I am so lucky to work with. On the other hand, sometimes when we are making these updates, it gets a little bit confusing, and you may be wondering what's going on and how are some of the things that you're doing different than they used to be. And for that reason, I want to be responsive to those really good questions. Okay, so the first question that came in, or that comes in somewhat consistently to me, is this one. How are you different? What makes the Latter-day Struggles platform different than a lot of the other spaces or podcasts online that have to do with Mormonism? And of course, that is a really big question, and one that I could take a long, long, long time on. And also you have to understand that I'm going to answer this according to sort of the way I like my perspective. So this isn't like the one and only answer. It's just how I sort of see what I do and what I offer that might be a little bit unique. So for one thing, there are platforms out there that are intended to be connection oriented. And I think mine is that too. But also what I want to do is I want to offer a space that is led by a mental health professional that understands the intersection of spirituality and mental health. And I think there are some spaces that are really, really good at just giving you a space to come together and talk about things, things that you're struggling with, or have conversations in a way that you can't do in other settings with people that used to be your tribe, and now they are not. They're not in a space where they understand you, or where you may feel uncomfortable, like you don't want to disrupt them where they are, or you may feel like you're judged. And so there are a lot of spaces, I think, that do that pretty well. I feel like we here on Latter-day Struggles do a beautiful job of creating that safe space, and also giving you a place or a time or the substance to not only process what hurts, but also a path towards transformation and healing. It's really important to me that the Latter-day Struggles podcast, and especially my interactive growth and processing groups, inclusive of my New Life Fellowship, these are places where we step into not only the processing of what happened and what we're feeling, but it's also how can we grow at a level of depth and breadth to where we take these things that have happened, and we can basically use a different, more evolved operating system within ourselves to make meaning of the things that have happened that brought us to the faith crisis. And so I feel like what I offer is some depth and breadth, and a path towards deepening our own sense of self. And as we grow our sense of self, we take that growth, and we are then able to integrate new skills, new ways of thinking, feeling, and seeing the world into some of the things that have happened to us through our Mormonism. And so I think that's something that I feel like I care a lot about, and that I think happens in the spaces that I try to create. Something else that I think is unique is that there seem to be at least a lot of spaces where that are women centric and that are for women. And I get that that is an important thing, and I don't disrespect that. I actually think it's a lovely thing, especially in a patriarchal church setting, to have spaces where women lead and women are invited to go to these spaces with women only. I personally feel that for me, I don't want this to be a women only space. I feel like we are all impacted by the uh, the struggles of our culture, society, and for those of us on a Mormon faith journey, this is something that impacts women and men. I know it impacts us differently, but the healing, I think, this is just my philosophy, that the some of our pain and suffering comes from gender issues, and the healing will also come as we grow together as all of the genders as we work together and learn that we are all in this together. And so I don't want to create a space that is binary in any way, shape, or form, meaning this is not a space only for women or only for a certain, like, you're in or you're out or you're active or you're inactive, or that's not what I am about. And so I want this to be a place where healing happens, and that women and men come together as equals. And it's really, really been transformative for many, many people. As a matter of fact, just this morning, I just finished a growth and processing group. We're probably in like week 5 or something like that. So it's pretty early on. And I just am so deeply touched by how we are showing up for one another. And in many ways, we are absolutely doing, how do I say this? The typical ways that we have been conditioned to show up from our early stage development, early stage faith, which oftentimes is like the men presiding and teaching and things like that, and the women sort of being on the side of not leadership but followership, and kind of in the one down role, is we're really, really mixing that up, in that, of course, it's women led because I facilitate, but more than that, it's that people show up not as a man or a woman, but as a self, as a human being, as a divine being. And that right there is very, very healing for a lot of people. We focus all the time in so many aspects of the Latter-day Struggles platform on what I feel to be maybe my most important, or one of my most important contributions to this space, is I believe in growth and development comes from transcendence and inclusion. And this is true of every aspect of growth and development throughout the world. So this is psychological, but it's also spiritual. It's about evolutionary development. And in every case, as anything becomes more complex and more evolved, it does so through transcending what no longer serves for the development of the human being, and including the earlier stages of development as building blocks to the current version of ourselves. And so whoever I am today, I will be different in down the road, but I need to include who I am today as a part of who I am becoming. And so I really integrate that into all of the work that I do here on the Latter-day Struggles platform. I'm really, really interested in helping our Mormon spectrum overcome what I see as some pretty extreme polarization. There's a lot of polarization in the world at large, and also that is reflected in Mormonism. And for me, I feel like one of my calls is to help us learn how to tolerate the differences of developmental, how do I say this? This is a little bit harder being live. I have to kind of like put my words together, and you get to hear me stumble a little bit more. But human beings in early development tend to be black and white thinking. We tend to gather at the poles and say, I am right, you are wrong. My tribe is right, your tribe is wrong. And what I am pushing us towards, and what I hope I offer in the work that I do on the podcast and in my groups, is a space to practice more critical thinking to where we can understand that development happens on an arc, that we need to allow everyone to be where they are, and to the degree that we can learn how to be open and compassionate and curious with people that are in a different space, that in and of itself invites all of us to grow. If I am on a faith expansion journey and I am curious and open and loving and compassionate to people who are not on a faith expansion journey, it actually invites them to stay open to who I am and what I'm experiencing. Whereas if I become vindictive and negative and judgmental of that loved one or friend who is not on a faith journey yet, I am not inviting them into any sort of curiosity at all. I'm actually inviting them to entrench themselves and defend their position. And also, when I stay in this space of compassion and showing up and being loving and understanding that every level of development is important and mandatory for each and every one of us to go through, I am actually practicing something that evokes more growth in me also. And so I really, really care about providing a new space that is non-binary in nature. It's very, very easy to have an early faith crisis and to attain just enough understanding and new knowledge to take all of our black and white thinking and fundamentalism and plug it into some new system of thought, meaning that I can stay just as judgmental as I used to be and gather at the pole and be just as strongly undifferentiated by whatever my new ideas are. And what I'm trying to do is actually really, really pressure us as a community to move beyond that, to recognize what growth and development looks like, and that at higher and further along levels of growth and development, we actually show up in a way that is compassionate and understanding towards those in earlier stages of development. That's easier said than done, but it's something that we practice on the ground all of the time in the little community spaces that I have created. Okay, whew, that was a long answer. I think I need to probably move a little faster. Let's go to question number 2. What is the difference between your Monday and Friday Latter-day Struggle podcast episodes and series? Such a good question. So what has evolved? And again, we're always evolving. We're a work in process. So if you've noticed that's sort of how we do it, then you're absolutely right. And it'll probably, we want to adapt, right? We want to stay current with what people want and need. And therefore, to some degree, there will be like ongoing adaptations. And that actually, as much as it sort of makes me itchy too, because I kind of would like to have like a structure that like, okay, this works. Let's just stick with this. There's a little piece of me that kind of would love that. But there's the other part of me that's like, no, we know what happens to systems that don't respond and adapt to the needs of the people that are participating. That becomes a system that is not flexible. And I want to be as flexible as I can. So to that end, we are currently doing Monday episodes of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. I sort of informally think about it as my Latter-day Struggles 1.0. This is continuous conversations around the fundamentals of the Mormon faith crisis. And so this is where we talk a lot about what is experienced, what one feels, how one can take their awakening and recognize that that's what it is. For the most part, when anyone goes into a Mormon, like starts down the path of a Mormon faith crisis, they have no idea what's going on. They certainly have no idea that this is actually a great thing and that they're psychologically developing and that they're right on schedule. And this is good. In other words, so I try to help reorient people. I try to help people have some language to sort of make sense of what they are experiencing. I also try to bring on theologians and authors to help us better understand not only our Mormon origins, but also how can we make sense of some of the reasons why Mormonism does what it does, believes what it believes, struggles with what it struggles with, and how can we become more complex thinkers, not only to make sense of it, but also to make sense of it in the context of our own lived experiences. And so that's my 1.0 Monday series of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. Now, Friday is slightly different, and Friday is for the seeker who has experienced some degree of resolution from, and I don't know if resolution feels like it's a very I don't know, an overstatement perhaps, but let's just say if you're a little bit deeper into your Latter-day struggles, your Latter-day Saint faith struggles, and you're not as much in the dark night of the soul anymore, but maybe you don't really know where to go or what to do next. And I can't tell you how many people I have talked to especially in my consulting and my growth and processing groups, who kind of have a better handle on why Mormonism is not serving them as well as it used to. But it started to occur to me that a lot of people felt like they were sort of wandering around in like a metaphorical wilderness and longing for a deeper understanding of spiritual enlightenment, of spiritual paths, of like, I don't want to fall into, I don't know, atheism or nihilism. Sometimes people feel I don't know how to make meaning of my, the inevitable suffering of humanity. I don't know what to do if I don't understand or if I don't have a sense of like, what is the plan of salvation? Like, how does this matter? And so as I kept hearing that and hearing people saying things to me like that, at the very same time, I was starting to read some philosophers and meaning makers, people who were talking about depth spirituality. Sometimes it's called transpersonal spirituality. This idea that like there are so many people in the 21st century who are just no longer resonating with the mythic God of the Old Testament and these versions of God and Jesus that for so many of us, that's all we were ever exposed to. And it's like, I don't like that. That doesn't work for me. But there's another part of us that doesn't really want to just throw it all out, because I think as a part of our spiritual awakening journey, we come to realize that we are in fact actually deeply spiritual beings. And so it's like, what do I do with that? That is why I have the Friday Transcending and Including Mormonism Latter-day Struggles. I call this my 2.0 sort of informally, because for me, this is integration time. This is a way or a time to expand our understanding of spirituality. It's a way to think about spirituality and even how different spiritual systems evolved. It's a way for us to think about ourselves as part of human evolution. It's a way for us to think about things that are a lot, I would say, I hope I'm not overstating this, but what I'm learning and what I like to talk about are things that never, ever, ever came up in the correlated Mormon, handbooks or even in the scriptures. It's a way to think about ourselves as spiritual being that by far transcends Mormonism, and it even transcends some degree of what I would consider to be tribal Christianity. And it actually situates us in a larger framework of what spiritual traditions in general have offered people really since the beginning of human consciousness. And that is why I care so deeply about this Friday content of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. Another questioner down the line here, a few questions later, I'm going to just throw this in here now because it's relevant, said, what's the favorite thing that you like to talk about in your Friday podcast? Because I can tell how excited you are about them. And that is a super hard question to answer, but I would say perhaps for me, what I love to do is take some principle of my early stage faith and orient it around something much bigger, much more inclusive, much more hope-giving, and much more resonant with who I am becoming as a spiritual person. Just recently, I did a series on what I'm considering for myself. It's new to me, a new plan of salvation. And it actually really sort of deconstructs what I was taught about the plan of salvation and even the atonement from my childhood that has just no longer resonated with me, because I don't believe in this concept of transaction anymore. I also don't believe in the need, like the blood atonement thing. I believe in as I am a spiritual being, I am growing and learning and awakening to who I am, but I don't really see myself in need of a savior the way I used to. And so it's taking these concepts and kind of exploding them, but replacing it with ideas that spiritual seekers have found at the in the deep parts of their own journeys for centuries. And these are really beautiful. This is beautiful to me because it's actually what human beings have found throughout time and written about. At the core of all of our beings, we find God within, and things of that nature. And so that's probably my favorite part of the Latter-day Struggles uh, 2.0, or transcending and including. Oh, I feel like I have to throw one more thing in. What I really love too about this is giving opportunities for people to practice transcendence and inclusion, meaning we can move beyond Mormon fundamentalism and the problems, the accompanying problems, and also the practice of expanding our consciousness such that we recognize that we need to include all of the pieces that got us to where we are. So as we transcend and sort of let go of elements, aspects, beliefs, and practices that no longer resonate or maybe never did, we can honor and respect that from a developmental standpoint, human beings, generally speaking, they need those things, and we needed some of those things before we threw them out or before we let them go. And so we can include the whole process of growth and development, which includes also a forgiving of our own prior selves, and also a love and compassion for others in earlier stages of development. We may not believe the same way that they believe, but we can start to understand why they believe as they believe, even if it is, in some ways we might find it problematic. But keep in mind, we probably believed some of those things too, and it has to do with growth and development and the management of fear and anxiety and the desire for inclusion and belonging. And all of those things actually make so much sense if we can sort of take a step back and look at how human beings awaken and develop. And I will hopefully and continue to give you the tools for better understanding that in my Transcending and Including Mormonism track, the Friday track of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. Okay, next question is, yes, I was kind of expecting this. And I've gotten several questions about this. So I'm kind of glad this came up because okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Question is, what do you talk about in the live fellowship? Okay, so such a valid, fair question, because this is a new thing that I just started 3 months ago. And I have to tell you, I kind of had a sense that it was going to be cool, but I don't even think I had a sense of how cool it was going to be. It has way surpassed my expectations in just sheer, like, I guess this is the nerdy version of fun. So everyone, has their different version of what they would call fun. But I'm going to legitimately call the live fellowship really, really fun, because what this is an evergreen group, meaning there's no opening, like there's no close, like it's never going to end until I guess I get, burned out and stop doing the podcast altogether. But at the moment, I'm willing to say that it's open-ended, and it is a space where those of you who are interested in deep, beautiful, rich, complex philosophical conversations can come, and we come together 2 times a month. And we use the Latter-day Struggles podcast as sort of the springboard or the jumping off point for our inquiry, our conversations. And typical of all of the groups that I run, I set the foundation or the standard is that everyone belongs and no one has to show up and believe a certain way. That belonging comes with the fact that you draw breath, and you and I and all of us are divine. And so it's about curiosity, it's about exploration, it's about openness, it's about being interested in one another's unique take on things of a spiritual nature. And so we just come together and we just play with ideas. And like I said, 3 months in, and there are about, I'd say maybe close to about 20 people in the fellowship. The registration sort of closed down just so we could kind of get acquainted with each other. But we have opened this back up for just, I think, until I hate to I should have this written. I want to say it's open till the 15th of June. And in that period of time, I would love to have as many of you who are interested to just join us, just show up. You're more than welcome to pipe in, or you're just more than welcome to listen and just like hear what this is about. So that's a bit of an overview of what we do in the Life Fellowship. But to give you a little bit more of okay, back to the question, what do you talk about? I think I was giving you sort of an overarching view, but to sort of like hone in and get a little bit more granular, I will tell you what we've talked about, several topics that we've talked about thus far in the first 3 months of our time together. So, first of all, we meet on Tuesday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, and that's roughly every other week. But if and when you join, I will send out a schedule. Okay, back to the topics. We have talked about. I mentioned already the new plan of salvation, which is these new ideas that really very much complicate, or complicate is probably the wrong word, because for me it actually uncomplicated a lot of what I learned about the plan of salvation in my earlier stage faith, in my sort of more traditionally believing Mormonism. But that was a fun conversation because everybody had very, very different stances on how they felt about it and whether or not they felt like it was relevant to them in their everyday life. And I love that. Like, that was so fun. We had a really rich, fascinating conversation about the current podcast series that I am running, Nathan and I do on the Monday podcast, which is how is the intersection between religion and politics. This is, of course, very, very relevant to current events. And so really, really interesting. And the conversation sort of veered towards lots of the group members wanted to talk about their thoughts on religion serving two different purposes and even two different demographics or levels of development. There are religions of legitimacy, and there are religions of transformation. And each of these types of religion are going to find a different population to serve. And also they are going to make choices around which social justice issues they choose to speak out on based on where they are in their own development. Such a fun conversation. And by the way this has evolved in my life fellowship is one of the group members will give sort of an overview. And usually we cover 1 or 2 episodes, even if it's a longer series, we'll just focus on 1 or 2. One of the group members will share sort of a review of the podcast series itself, and then we just go. It just is intentionally sort of unstructured. I will do a little bit of facilitation, but what I really like and have enjoyed is just letting the group sort of take it in whatever direction interests them. Another topic we talked about is the myth of normal. That was on the podcast a month or 2 ago, and really, really interesting to talk about the differences between what is normal developmentally, if you think about this from a psychological perspective, and what is normative. Well, the difference between normal and normative, and how certain things are normal because you see them all the time, but they may not be healthy or psychologically adaptive. And we really played with the difference between those. And that was very jaw-dropping for a lot of the Life Fellowship members. What's coming up, if you're somebody who wants to show up, especially if you want to come to this next one, that is on the 7th of June, this coming Tuesday, we are going to be discussing something that is on the Friday side of the podcast. So the Life Fellowship tackles both of the Monday side and the Friday side. And if and when you join the Life Fellowship, you get automatic access to all of the content. But we are going to be talking about this series that Nathan and I are doing together right now, called Radical Wholeness, or Finding Radical Wholeness, which is 5 different ways to express or experience deepening spirituality. And so, of course, this could be hours and hours of fun conversation. And I just chose one of them. So we are going to be tackling one of the many aspects that people can think about and focus on as they are actively deepening their own relationship with their spiritual selves. And this is, really, really fun because people that are in the Life Fellowship and also in my growth and processing groups are very interested in sort of claiming their own spirituality on their own terms. And sometimes it's a transition to move from like a handbook correlated, like, here's what you do sort of spirituality to what should I do? How can I achieve a richer, deeper relationship with things of a spiritual nature and my own higher self and things like that? And this episode actually helps us recognize how development works, and that we develop in very, very interesting and complex ways. And that someone who is more devout very well may have strengths where I still have weaknesses, even if I am on a spiritual journey and I am seeking, and I may be moving beyond a devout loved one in other ways. And so it's a really cool topic, and I chose it so that I kind of wanted us to have a conversation about this, because I think it's tempting sometimes to think that if we are on a spiritual journey, or if we are expanding in our faith, that means we are smarter, more spiritual, better, superior. In other words, said slightly differently, human beings have this tenacious addiction to wanting to create hierarchies of power. And I want to always be mindful that just because growth is happening, that does not mean that it puts anyone in a position of superiority. That we're all doing our best, and that each of us has various strengths and weaknesses. So that's what this coming Tuesday's topic is going to be about. And then in 2.5 weeks, we're jumping back over to the Monday side of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. And I am so excited to have you hear this 2-part series. A psychiatrist approached me a couple of months ago because he had felt called to create an entire platform serving full-time missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints around issues of mental health. And I get like a little bit choked up when I think about this topic. I even am right now. If you're seeing me live on Instagram or on YouTube, I feel very strongly about this, in part because, of course, I have my fellow on a mission right now. And I can see on the ground there are certain, vulnerabilities, to say the least, in the full-time mission experience. And this gentleman, who is a very, very devoted listener to this podcast, and so it kind of might give you a sense of his own faith expansion stance. He felt to provide a resource that doesn't exist in the sort of formal correlated church for any of us, any of our children who are wanting to serve a mission, and maybe we don't know what to do to help them thrive. And I will say that this is near and dear to my heart also because the demographic of people that know and love and follow the Latter-day Struggles podcast, you were the most devout of the devout. You were overachieving. Someone actually just recently said, I wasn't just active, I was hyperactive Latter-day Saint. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to be borrowing that. So for those of us former hyperactive Latter-day Saints who diligently raised our children in all of the programs of the church, we may be on a faith expansion journey and have complicated feelings about something like a Mormon mission. And also, at the very same time, we may have children who are approaching mission age and are wanting to serve missions because their loved ones, aka sometimes their parents, us, we encouraged that, and we shared how meaningful and important it was. And if you're anything like me, I maintain that my mission was meaningful and important. I was very much a different person then, but I do also feel that it was an important developmental passage in my life. And so this live fellowship that comes up in a couple of weeks is our discussing this 2-part conversation that I had with this physician, this psychiatrist, who has committed a great deal of his professional time to serve ourselves and our children and our former selves. So if you're somebody who has someone that you know and love that wants to serve a mission, this is for you. If you're someone who's served a mission and haven't even maybe been in the church for a long time, this might be something that will resonate with you so that you can maybe process or at least contemplate on the goodness that is unfolding in the world right now that we didn't have access to when we were on missions, in a former life. And so this is something that I'm very, very excited to share for a multitude of reasons. So if you're interested in any of these, really, is that these are always open for a one-time try. But since we're in an enrollment period, I would absolutely love to have you jump in and join. And I'm just, when I was enrolling this from the gate, I'm not going to lie to you, it was a little scary because you have to have a foundation of people that care about growth, development, awakening, leading out in expansive love and compassion towards all of the levels of development. And I had to kind of just, manifest that these people would appear to open this community up, and they have. And so I feel deeply confident that if you are someone that wants a space to practice depth and breadth and complex thinking, and a way to opening to yourself more expansive ways to not only see yourself as a spiritual being, but to think about spiritual things in an environment where lots of ideas are flowing, but also to get to increasingly be able to interact with others of different stages of development. That is what we do in the Latter-day Struggles live fellowship. I'm going to get a little, I guess, visionary here with you for a minute. One of the reasons why I care a lot about groups, and I think I'm actually pivoting, actually on accident, but it works out kind of perfectly. Somebody said, "Why do you care about groups? Like, why? A lot of other people do these one-on-one things, but you do so many groups. Why?" And the reason why is there's a lot of reasons, but I guess I'll give you a few reasons. First of all, the faith crisis is certainly an internal crisis, but it's also a relationship and it's a social crisis. Because again, for so many of us who were, hyperactive Latter-day Saints, our community was our church friends and our family, and so much of our family identity, our friendship identities, and our community identities are absolutely shaped around our Mormonism. And so, when we have the audacity to grow, sometimes we feel like we have nowhere to go. And that in and of itself is traumatic. And so experiencing the belonging of a group of people who may not be exactly where you are on the faith journey, but who understand what you're going through on some level and see you and get you and normalize what you're going through is profoundly healing. In other words, that is as important as any concept that I may introduce. So that's one of the reasons why I absolutely care about forming these little communities. I believe that awakening or faith expansion happens one individual at a time, but it happens exponentially when small groups of people come together and create little pocket communities of growth and of awakening. In other words, I think there's a synergy that happens when we not only grow ourselves, but when we grow in the context of a community that understands how important it is to be in connection. We grow exponentially as a larger community when small communities practice expanding in healthy ways, when we practice transcending and inclusion in these small spaces. Then we can bring that into our homes, into our marriages, into our relationships with loved ones that are more devout. We can even bring those into the spaces on a Sunday morning if we feel inclined to practice in a little bit riskier environments. But this is how communities evolve. Sometimes people say it'll never change, and I get that. I've had those moments myself, and I'm here to say hogwash. Things always do change. And what's going to happen in Mormonism, I firmly believe, is that there will be an awakening or there will be a deeper atrophy and there will be some version of a death cycle. And so, in other words, things are always changing. We're either having these crisis points where something needs to give and we move through them and become better by them because certain things die and other things wake up, or if we can't move through them and have these awakening experiences, then certain aspects of the organization will die. And in some ways, that's like the order of the universe. And so what I'm here to say is that as a cultural and I consider myself very, very ethnically Mormon. I come from Mormon pioneers. I'm one of those people. And I care about this system. I care about its the goodness that it has created in so many of us. I also care about some of its shadows and the places where some pretty extreme struggles are happening. And so what I feel that these small communities are doing is, even if there are struggles at an institutional formal level that are, where there is some resistance to reform or to awakening, we as community members in, out, around, I don't care what your designation is, as it's like formally with the church. If you have some heritage and this is a part of your identity and you are growing an awakening and becoming a deeper, richer, more love-infused person, someone who is able to expand your circle of love and inclusion more than you ever have before, then you, my friend, are part of a movement that is actually moving the center of gravity of Mormonism upwards into a richer, deeper, more mature, more awakened place. And my little communities are one of the places where I want this to be happening. I remember not too long ago, well, I guess it's been a couple of years ago, I was listening to one of the Mormon podcasts. Apologize for being very vague on that because I actually can't remember what it was, but one of the gentlemen that was on a panel said, the one thing that the institutional church doesn't want is a movement. So you'll probably be okay in whatever your version of growth is, as long as you just do not create a movement. And I thought that was super fascinating because I thought to myself, and I stand by that to this day, I respectfully disagree. The only way our world has moved forward in its evolutionary thrust towards God consciousness is through the creation of small communities of people who are willing to challenge the status quo. And that is a movement. And that's a movement towards growth. That's a movement towards transformation. That's a movement away from aspects of certain communities, Mormon and otherwise, that get stuck. They get in their own way. And so we find little pockets of people that understand the value of their home tradition, or the value of a big part of their identity, which for so many of us, Mormonism is a part of our identity. And then we take what still serves, let go of that which doesn't, but we model a new, different way of being in connection with ourselves and with others. And that's what happens in my growth and processing groups as we heal from the faith crisis, as we heal from the impacts of being socialized in a patriarchy. And that's what happens in my life fellowships as we come together and just practice being with one another in the context of all sorts of different topics. I tell you, I finish these live fellowship meetings and I'm just all smiles for the rest of the day because it's so invigorating to be around people who love me for just who I am, and I love them for just who they are, and who show up authentically because what they're interested in is being a part of something that invites growth and awakening, and it's completely and totally infused by and powered by mutual love and respect. And that is such a rare commodity, a rare experience in this day and age where there's so much polarization going on. Okay, I will answer one more question. I feel like there's a few more, but I also feel like as I get going, I sort of overlap and answer some other questions as well. Let me see here. Let me pivot, if I may, to there's a question that one of you asked about how can I talk to loved ones on different rungs of the ladder respectfully? Okay, I love that. Okay, the question is wonderful. And also, I feel like it probably deserves a little bit of context. This is a listener who I think is referencing a podcast episode that I think it was Nathan and I talked about using the rungs of a ladder to better understand the path towards development. And I think this might be on the Friday fellowship side of the Latter-day Struggles podcast. And so we talked about the rungs, the ladders, and the climber. And so if you think about this metaphorically, the ladder is growth and development. It's our journey towards greater and greater beauty, goodness, light, and truth. And each rung represents a place of development. It's a you could call it a stage of faith if you wanted to kind of like layer it over that model that many of you are familiar with. And so as we are on one rung of the ladder, we do very, very important things. That, in other words, in every rung of the ladder, we are learning things. We are experiencing things that awaken us to different aspects of goodness, light, and truth. And we stay on that rung of the ladder for as long as necessary. And that's why you may meet someone or you may grow up in a family where at some point in time everybody's on the same rung, but inevitably people start moving around, right? People, start to transition to different spaces in their relationship with spirituality. And so, what that means is that at some point in time, when your soul or my soul satisfies all of the, requirements on that rung of the ladder, a transition starts to take place. And that's where usually there's something that feels more like a crisis, right? Because where we are accustomed to being no longer feels good or resonates or is satisfactory to our growing soul. And so there is a disruption internally. And what that really is, if to stay with this metaphor, is we are moving from one rung to the next rung of the ladder. Now, keep in mind with my commitment to talking about transcendence and inclusion, that if you're on a rung of the ladder and you move to another rung of the ladder, please don't take a saw and cut the ladder off below you because, from the metaphorical standpoint, if you do that, you will fall. The ladder, doesn't hold on air. It holds on all of the other structures underneath the rung where you are. And so what this ends up bringing about as one grows and moves from rung to rung is that from every perspective, each rung, there's a different worldview. There's a different point of view. I maintain that all of these worldviews count. They get to exist because they actually do exist. So we might as well just acknowledge them with compassion. The questioner asked, how do I, with compassion, share things with someone, a loved one, who is on a different rung of the ladder? My response would be, first of all, a curiosity about what you want to share and why you want to share it. Because I think deep inside of us, we have this, part of our Mormon identity development is that of passionate I'm not going to say that word right. Okay, forget it. Missionary work. Let me say that. That's easier to say. And so we want to evangelize. And we want to share like the new light and truth. And I would invite myself and you, and all of you that if this is relevant, to be just at least mindful of what is driving your need to share what you're experiencing. I think it matters what the motive is. I think it matters what the relationship is. I think if you're in an intimate relationship or a marriage, it's appropriate at some point in time to share your worldview, because otherwise you're not going to be actually in an authentic marriage, right? At some point in time that needs to be addressed. I also think there are some relationships where we can continue to coexist and have a relationship that may not be quite as satisfying as it used to be, but that it doesn't need to necessarily be infused with all of the things that are happening within us. We don't need to feel compelled in sort of like a scrupulous way that everyone needs to know every step of our internal faith experience. I think it depends on the relationship. So that's one part of my answer. The other part of the answer is, let's suppose that you're someone who is having conflict with or is feeling conflicted because a loved one is on a different rung, and you feel the need, or it feels appropriate and right for you to share something with them. What I would say in terms of doing this in a very careful, cautious, and respectful way is to be mindful of what their experience is, where they are. Even one of the activities we do in one of my groups, actually, this is relevant, I promise, is we actually talk about your most devout loved one, the one that's having the hardest time with you in your faith expansion experience. Let's just imagine or think about, to your knowledge, why are they seemingly thriving in their more traditionally believing worldview? And it's a beautiful activity of empathy, of trying to better understand why people stay in certain rungs of their ladder for longer than we wish or would expect, and sometimes forever. And that's kind of where I'm headed with this answer, is have some compassion on why your loved one is where they are. And then the other piece I would say is, even if you feel to share something, maybe consider thinking about how you might share it in a way that is authentic and vulnerable about your own emotional experience connected to whatever it is that you've learned about. I would also talk, I like to keep things connected to what you feel about your growth and how you are feeling differently, and that maybe you're saying, I was feeling very frightened and lonely uh, about whatever the topic is, but focus less on the topic and more on the experience, because that might invite more compassion and less defensiveness from your loved one on a different rung of the ladder, to stay with that metaphor. Something else that I try to do and I think about is to stay in curiosity and compassion for your loved ones, meaning that even if they struggle with hearing what you have to say, to sort of titrate that, be sensitive to who they are, where they are, what their things are, but then also maybe lean into curiosity about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, why this feels important to them, or why their response to our experience feels maybe scary to them. And so to allow this scary moment about your own self-disclosure to hopefully become a moment of connection and curiosity. I would say the last thing that comes up for me as I'm thinking about this question and is to try as best as we can to help our loved ones feel that our relationship does not need to be founded on belief, that our relationship can be founded on a connection that transcends belief, that there are things that we have in common that we care about. Oftentimes there are a lot of values that are very, very similar that may drive us to different conclusions on our spiritual journey. But for so many of us, our faith expansion experience is driven by integrity, and a more traditionally believing loved one's position where they are is driven by what they feel is at the core of their integrity. We might all be driven by a desire for connection, love. Our love of family is, again, that can drive people in different directions in terms of how we interpret that. But the core values oftentimes remain the same. And so maybe we can move into helping our loved ones feel reassured that this faith expansion journey is not it's not about our trying to distance ourselves or blow things up, but we're trying to live in our deep integrity, but we also want to honor them in their deep integrity. And then we, I think, take it one conversation, one relationship at a time. Okay, I feel like I have answered most of the questions. Oh, but I do think, okay, just kind of to circle back, if you're interested in jumping in and trying out the Life Fellowship, because it is, we're in an enrollment period right now. It's what I kind of decided was to keep that organic. I don't want it open enrolled all the time, because I do like the existing cohort as it stands to have some time together to get to know one another. And then after a little while, once I feel like there's some established trust and camaraderie and some openness, then we'll open it up for a few more people to come in. And that's where we are right now, is we're at an open enrollment right now for the next couple of weeks or so. And if you're interested in the trial group, if you're interested in just jumping right in, I love that. And this is how you can do so. You can go to the link in my bio if you're watching this on Instagram Live. If you're listening to this on the Latter-day Struggles podcast, you can jump down to the show notes, which will link you to how to enroll. Or if you just want more information about this, go to the website, latterdaystruggles.com. And I would love more than anything to have you in my life and to learn and grow from you and the relationship that we can develop as we cultivate these beautiful little communities that are modeling what consciousness awakening, what faith expansion, and what greater love and openness towards everyone in our Mormon faith community can look like. It begins with you and me. So I would love it if you join me. Thank you for joining me for this, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.